Hello, listeners of the Bonfire. As you can probably tell, I am not Alan. He is out for this one. He may be joining us a little bit later. Scheduling conflicts have been difficult around the holiday season. I am Tim. I will be hosting this episode. I am here with DJ.
Hello, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, all those good things.
And a special guest who has obviously been on the podcast several times before, Alex.
Hello. Happy to be here once again.
So, gentlemen, let's just get into it. We've got a lot to discuss. For a kind of a quiet couple of days early in the off season, we started getting a torrent of news. The MLS schedule dropped on Thursday. We're going to go over that. There are a number of Fire roster moves as Greg Berhalter, the other Greg Broughton, Mikey Stevens, and Eddie Rock have started to remake the Fire roster ahead of 2025. We have updates on roster status. We have information on teams' GAM positions for the first time in MLS history. But first, we'll start it off with a brief stadium update. So, according to a reporting from Daniel Ecker at Crane Chicago Business, the Fire MLS and the 78 developer Related Midwest met with the mayor and the alderwoman Pat Dowell from the ward where the 78 is located. They shared renderings of a 25,000-seat soccer-specific stadium. The location is sort of like just south of Roosevelt Road, just west a little bit of the L stop, like just east of the river, if that makes any sense. So it's about a mile away from Soldier Field. It's about a mile and a half away from the Chicago Fire's new performance center. And so it's really the prime location, I think, for a lot of things for the Fire. It is the location that they're focused on, obviously, because they're meeting with elected officials about it. The reporting made it clear that there has been no agreement yet to sell the land from Related Midwest to the Fire or a related entity. But obviously, again, you don't call up the mayor and start showing them stadium renderings because you think there's a small chance this could happen.
I will say the fact that the 78 is favorite also helps a lot because it's so close to Soldier Field that when there are those big, like, Messi-esque events, that will give at least something else too. Because 25,000 is not a lot, but when the Fire can reach the higher amounts, you're close enough that you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I said it on a podcast last season. The Fire's new stadium has to be ambitious. It has to be at least 30,000 or more, in my opinion. I know they're throwing around 25,000. You can realistically sell that out every week if the team is good, especially in the summer. But for me, having the option to get more fans in, especially in a market like Chicago, where on a good day you can get 40,000, 50,000 if the team is good. So having that flexibility is going to be good. I think for most people, 78 was always the top option, especially because of how close it is to the performance center and how convenient that is. Most teams around the world have, if their training center isn't in the same place, it's pretty nearby. It's pretty abnormal that Fire players who live in the city or live in the South Loop have to go all the way out to Bridgeview every day at 6 a.m. to go to training.
To be clear, it's abnormal in the world of soccer. It's not that abnormal in North American professional sports,
right,
including in MLS. Yes,
but for players who are coming from that kind of environment, it's beneficial where everything's within a mile and a half, as opposed to some of these guys coming from Germany, from France.
There's definite benefits, right? Because let's right now, do you want to live near Bridgeview where you are most days out of the week, or do you want to live where you want to live and drive all the way to Bridgeview? It just isn't much.
Like guys coming from Lugano, for example, it's driving to Bridgeview is like crossing the city of Lugano 5 times. You know what I mean?
It's like driving across Switzerland. Yeah.
You say that as a joke, but the drive from downtown to Bridgeview on like a slightly above traffic average day is 1/3 the time it takes to cross the country of Switzerland.
No, I know. So it's again, it's exciting that this is happening. Just to put it in context, though, the first move would be the Fire acquiring the land. That's sort of like what we saw the Bears do with the former Arlington Downs race course. And then there starts to be discussions about, with elected officials about the size of the stadium and stuff like that. Now, I mean, DJ, you're right. Like the traffic there wouldn't be nearly as bad as what Soldier Field traffic is, just given the size. Although, Alex, I do agree with you. Like, it would be ideal if it was closer to 30,000 or above. 25,000 seems small. But I think that the truth of the matter is also that MLS is moving to a model sort of like what we've seen from US soccer, where I'm sure that the stadium will have plenty of premium seating options and stuff like that. So they're going to look at ways to maximize the revenue for the seats that they have more than maximize the number of people. That is not what I would want in my heart of hearts. Like, I want more people there, and I want there to be tickets available at price points that make it affordable for a wide variety of people, including families and stuff like that, to go. But it's sort of the direction the league is moving in. But
It also wouldn't shock me if it's 25,000 plus, because what I've seen a lot of stadiums, especially like big cities, do is they'll have it set to that, but then they'll make it expandable should there be some reason to. So, like, yeah, it's 25,000 when they build it, but if more people want to come, then they'll expand it like 30 and then 35.
and we saw that with I think the biggest example of that happening is probably BMO Field in Toronto. Um, the the now LA Galaxy Stadium in Carson, which has gone by several names over the years, expanded in size as well. Bridgeview was designed to be expanded significantly in size and a couple of different possibilities. That's a little bit harder to do if there's a roof, but again, we don't have renderings. A lot of this is premature. I think it is. I think it is promising that we're seeing this kind of movement from the team. It was very deliberate that Joe Mansueto spoke about being unhappy with Soldier Field for the first time publicly, really, at the Greg Berhalter introduction press conference, which is the time that the Fire are probably going to have the most local and national media attention on it over the foreseeable future. So that, I think says something about how seriously the team is taking this. So next steps obviously would be something about a sale of the land. DJ, like was, trying to get to earlier, that it's not going to be Soldier Field traffic, but the neighbors around the parcel of the 78 are very organized and seem to not really like the idea of there being anything other than a couple of miles of weeds there. So, I guess we'll see what happens. But I think the Fire have a good chance of getting this through quicker than the other locations, particularly Lincoln Yards. And it just seems like it's kind of a best case scenario for the 78 because it does start the production of, like, it would start the development, and it would be significantly fewer game days, for example, than like if the Sox built a stadium there, like they've been asking for taxpayer help to do.
Right, and I think the advantage that the Fire have over any other team in Chicago is that it's going to be entirely privately funded. So it's not even an issue. Like, even the Bears, the Sox, whatever it is, the conversation around that with the Fire, there's not even a question that it's going to be privately funded 100%.
All
So,
asking for, yeah, all the others are asking for billions of dollars in private money. The Fire are not.
right, and the other thing is that Lincoln Yards, as good of a location as that is, I think in general, and it's within the city, there would be a lot more political pushback within the area from the local ward, from the local residents about having a stadium there because it's an entirely residential area for the most part.
Well, there already was a soccer-specific stadium on Lincoln Yards that was already nixed once over traffic concerns. Either way, it looks like the 70 is the one the team is moving forward with. And speaking about moving forward, the league released a schedule. That was this past Thursday. There are some significant changes, I think, from previous years. The League's Cup break, which was a month plus, that basically put the entire MLS season on a hiatus and ruined momentum from a lot of teams that happened to the Fire in 2023, is gone. Um, the league is breaking for a shorter period for the Club World Cup and Gold Cup because, of course, we can't just have one thing happening in North American soccer or soccer in North America at the same time. Um, and there's a movement around the league to have some additional matinees. The Fire have a couple. Still not the number that I think that the team and a lot of fans want. Um, They do have a first game against San Diego. They have the first time in recent years that the Brimstone Cup will be contested, and that's coming up very early in the season. Uh, the game against Miami is happening earlier in the season than we've seen in recent years, so it's going to be April, but that is a matinee game. Probably it will mean it's the only game being played at that point in time, so a lot of eyeballs on it from around the league.
Messi's
And
already said
You
dismiss it.
didn't mention opening day, Tim. Opening day against Columbus, homecoming for Greg Berhalter. I think that's one of the most fascinating fixtures on the schedule.
well, Greg Berhalter's from New Jersey, so
Well, he was in Columbus for several years, and his kids consider Columbus home. So
yeah, and I think that that'll be interesting. You know, I think the other thing worth saying is that once again, the Fire get to have a game against St. Louis. This time it will be at home. Last year it was away, so it seems good that the league is committing to that fixture as a rivalry match. And the first game against LAFC for the Fire since 2019, excluding preseason. So, but yeah, the I think the opening week and opening weeks I think for the Fire are worth talking about a little bit. So, you talked about the Crew game. I think at this point, we know how good the Crew have been over the past couple of years. It does look like it's going to be a Crew team in transition, and there could be a lot of changes between now and the time that game is played. Um, Nothing is imminent according to reporting from Tom Bogert and others, but everything from Cucho Hernandez could possibly leave to Wilfred Nance could possibly leave. Like it could be a very different Crew team than the one that won MLS Cup in 2023. So the Fire, I think, I don't know, like I'd like your opinion on both of this. I know that the Crew are probably looking at the schedule and penciling that in as a W, but I think the Fire have a decent chance of getting a result away in Columbus in their first game of the season.
yeah, I think the Fire are going to come out firing in that game. Honestly, if I had to make a prediction right now, I don't think the Fire are going to lose that game. It could be a draw. It could be an unlikely win. I don't think the Fire are going to lose that game because we do have to consider a couple of things. If all of these changes we're expecting in Columbus happen, it's going to be a completely new identity that they're going to be trying to find. And they're probably not, they might not even have a permanent head coach in place by that point, or even if it is, it might be a hire from within. So that's number one. Number two, they're going to be playing CONCACAF Champions League, or CONCACAF Champions Cup, excuse me. Last year, every team that played CONCACAF Champions Cup struggled in their early weeks of the season. The Fire got several, they didn't win very many games last year. They only won 7. But there were several games the Fire played early in the season against CCL teams where they did better than you would expect them to. Like opening day against Philadelphia, almost won.
They got a draw. They got a draw on that, and then the
almost beat Columbus in week 3. They lost Cincy in week 2, which was just
in a heartbreaking loss in a game where they did control the game for long stretches.
So the point I'm making is that teams in CCL tend to underperform, and those results the Fire had were pretty much the best results that any CCL team got in that spread. If you guys remember, like it was like unanimously every CCL team was losing games except for the ones that were playing the Fire.
It's difficult just given the size of MLS rosters to play 2 high-level games in a week, especially when a lot of the time you're traveling, crossing continents, basically, to get there. So, I think that you're right. That could be a decent result, or like a decent chance at a result. The week after that, the Fire host DC United. That's going to be the home opener. DC seems like they're kind of hamstrung with their roster rebuild.
It's all a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, they just basically let go of Matthews Click, one of their 3 DPs. They have all 3 slots filled. Trading him to Atlanta, but retained the DP slot and didn't get a lot of salary relief for that. So, they're going to basically have no more than 2 DPs when the season kicks off. They've already used their buyout, apparently. They have a pretty full roster. on one hand, they don't have a lot of ability, it seems, to add. So, and this is also a team that, along with the Fire, is on the longest active playoff drought in MLS. So, um,
TC
I
looks a
think
lot like Fire from last year. Honestly.
Didn't DC make the playoffs in 2019 and lose in the first
Yeah, I
round?
want to
to
say
Toronto?
yes.
They lost in extra time 4-1 to Toronto, I think.
yes. So it's the two longest. Yeah, they were fifth in the East that year.
Yeah.
But it's the two longest active playoff droughts. Sorry, I should have said uh, in MLS. Um, I think the Fire have a good chance of winning that. I mean, it's at home. It is March 1st in Chicago, so there's a reasonable chance it could be cold, or it could be 68 degrees. You really don't know.
Wasn't that
Um,
the case last year? I wasn't in Chicago, but I feel like it was pretty warm for some of those early
it,
games.
it was warm last year. The year prior, it was absolutely freezing in 2023.
Hmm.
But again, like you don't know, like the weather overall will be cold, colder than it is in DC typically. And again, like DC is a roster where they brought in a new GM last year in Ellie McKay, who's well regarded, but he inherited a lot of long term bad contracts. I think the Fire, if you look like we can talk about who the better Belgian is in terms of like strikers, like Christian Benteke has obviously had a better record than Hugo Kuipers. Um, I think part of that's players around him. Click had DC's assist record the year prior, last season rather. He's gone, so who is going to be helping Benteke get that production? I think the Fire have a very good chance of getting a result and actually a win in that first home game.
Yeah, I think what's a bit different to previous years is that the Fire in the last couple of seasons. Are we just talking about the early stretch or the whole season?
Early stretch.
Just the early stretch? Because I feel like the last couple of years, the Fire have had a pile up of incredibly difficult games right at the start. And that's not the case here.
Last year,
No.
especially, was like the toughest.
Last
Even
year
with
was
CCL,
insane.
it was bad. Yeah, it was really bad.
Last year, they were starting the season by playing the top 3 teams in the East from the year before. Like, that's not normal.
Which, yeah, this season does seem like it's going to get off, hopefully, to a better start, at least against the certain teams. But
Yeah. No, so again, like the Fire have a decent chance of getting results early on, right? Like after that, I'm just going to read these out and we can kind of discuss them sort of briefly. Um 3 games away, it is the second longest away stretch that the Fire have. Um March 8th away to Dallas. So that's the real first time that Greg Berhalter will have a chance to win a cup with the Fire. The Brimstone Cup, which has not been contested in recent years.
Yeah, last
Um,
time was in 2022, but that was a 0-0 draw. So the last time a team actually won it properly was 2019 when the Fire, I believe it was 4-0. And I think Nikolic scored 2 goals. That just gives you an idea of how long ago it was.
and the last time the Fire actually beat Dallas in Dallas was 2013. For reference, that was a game where Jaleel Anibaba and Austin Berry both scored. To give an idea of how long ago that was.
There you
Oh
go.
man, it's gonna be hilarious when it's Jaleel Anibaba on the call in MLS season pass.
I would love that.
So then following that, March 15th away to Toronto. That is a 1:30 start. So one of the matinee games. I believe the Fire are the only team, like the Fire and Toronto are the only teams playing in that time slot. Um, you know, Toronto obviously kind of in a bit of flux as well. I think it'll be interesting to see how different the roster looks by opening day or by like week 3 of the season. Like can they move on from Lorenzo Insigne and one of the richest contracts in league history before like in the January window before that game happens? I don't know. Um, so I guess we'll just have to see. But that I think if you're the Fire for an early season away game, like that seems like a game where the team should be able to get a result again. The week after that, they continue playing Canadian teams. They're away to Vancouver. Um, that is the only 9:30 Central kickoff that the Fire have this year, which is sort of nice for, I think, pretty much all of us uh, that may be watching it. Vancouver
It's only
got
10:30 Eastern time kickoff. That's the important part for me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Whitecaps dismissed Vanni Sartini. They have all their DP slots spoken for at the moment. They don't have a ton of roster flexibility. I don't know how you guys feel. I sort of feel like for a roster of a fairly limited spend, Vanni Sartini was more or less getting the most juice out of that particular orange or lemon or whatever fruit strikes your fancy. It sounds like ownership is betting that they can get more out of a different coach. So I guess we'll see if that's the case. But I think that, I mean, my kind of bet is that the downside risk on getting rid of Sartini is bigger than the upside risks. So they could be a worse team than the one that we've seen with Sartini, who has like managed to get the team to win trophies. I mean, admittedly, that Canadian Championship is not the most difficult trophy available to MLS teams to win, but he has still done it over teams that have spent a lot more. The team has been in CONCACAF Champions Cup or League, depending on the year. I don't know that the team is going to be that good this upcoming year.
Yeah, and they also made the terrible mistake of letting Levante Johnson go at the end of his contract and not picking up his option. So
I feel like there might be some bias in that statement, but hey.
maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll never know.
Following that, the Canadian swing continues, although this time at home. It is a game against CF Montreal. That is 7:30 on March 29th. That's the Fire's second home game of the season. Montreal obviously made it to the postseason in last year, but not the playoffs proper, losing out to Atlanta, who then went on to defeat Miami. They have no DPs at the moment. I don't think are really going to spend a lot more than they've gotten. It sounds like Laurent Courtois is sticking around for another season. I guess his job is to try to like work a magic or find great production from people that so far haven't done it.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, Montreal did get the best value pick out of the MLS Super Draft in Michael Adalokin, who's probably, in my opinion, going to win the Mac Herman Trophy. Now, this is not a guy who's going to be a superstar for them on day one, but I think he's an interesting player, and I think that's a good start to their offseason to get him out of the draft with the 13th pick.
Yeah, and I mean, it is the kind of team that like does seem to do pretty well finding things and like not as much super draft picks, but like picking up players from like the like scratch and dent bin from other MLS teams and stuff like that. They've gotten some
I mean, they
good
revitalized Caden Clark. Like they resurrected Caden Clark's career. So hopefully that continues for their sake next season.
yeah,
But
Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy as well. They have who was a very highly rated prospect in MLS that didn't
oh yeah,
really have the career trajectory that they were hoping for. So I think they're going to be hoping to strike with that again. I mean, but it's not a team that's going to spend a lot. It's a team that the Fire have gotten some good results with before.
they spend 1/5 of the amount as the next lowest spending team in the league. That's just for perspective. I can't understate how much as an organization CF Montreal spends compared to the rest of the league.
Yeah, they don't weigh very much. They have consistently punched above their weight. Having said that, I mean, again, like if you're the Fire, you're looking at this schedule. There are, I guess, out of your first 6 games, 2.5 playoff teams, if we count Montreal as a half for making it in, or out of the first 5 games, 2.5 playoff teams. That's a pretty easy start to a schedule, all things considered, in a league where the majority of the teams make the postseason. So, I think that you're hoping that you can get results there. Obviously, the team, is going to look different by that point than they did at the end of last season. They already do. Um, I don't know, guys. How do you feel about the start of the schedule?
It's going to be good, hopefully. Because one thing too is I think Berhalter wants to get off to a good start. Considering we'll talk about it later, but the roster moves, I think he's going to want to get as much out of the first 10 games or so as he can, because once the summer hits, things are probably going to change again.
Yeah, we're gonna focus on roster moves in a little bit, but in my opinion, it's like right now the roster is far from being ready to play in MLS. Like they've made 5 additions already, and none of them are game changers, other than one. But with that being said, Berhalter needs a good start because he's coming from a job where he was under very, very high pressure, and that got to him at the end. So hopefully, if the club wants to get the most out of him, out of his tenure, they want to have a fast start. They want to have a good bump in these first couple of months.
And they're set up well to do it, I think, is the point. Like they're not facing murderer's row early in the season like they kind of were last year.
Like last year, Frank Klopas didn't have a chance. He didn't even have a chance because there was no way that with the roster he had, he was going to be with his ability as a coach, he was going to be able to navigate that first stretch of the season. And when you start that badly, overall, just sets you up for complete and utter failure. So, well, no, I'm not saying that he's an incredible coach or anything and he was done wrong, but he just did not have a chance because of the schedule.
Yeah, it was a rough schedule. It's easier this year. But Klopas's departure is not the only thing that we are going to be missing versus last year. A number of roster moves. First, the departure that we didn't get a chance to talk about it because it hadn't happened yet during our last episode. Georgios Koutsias is temporarily, potentially, no longer a Chicago Fire player. He was loaned out to FC Lugano for the rest of the 2025 season. The Fire have an option to recall. Lugano have an option to make it a personal transfer. Alex, you reported on this because there were competing offers out there, and because it was a loan, the Fire were able to keep their buyout in moving Kutsi off, which means that they no longer have to have his salary on the cap, nor do they have to retain him in a U22 slot. So that frees up that prize roster slot for the Fire, as well as an international slot on the Fire roster.
Yeah, so this is an interesting move because this has been discussed internally within the organization since like June, July, because he didn't score the entire first half of the season. So my understanding since the summer was the plan is for him to go to Lugano at the end of the season. Originally, it might have been a permanent move, but a permanent move would require the buyout. Look, like I said to Tim yesterday or 2 days ago, I think I have a pretty decent grasp on MLS's main roster rules, but I still learn 1 or 2 new things every week. And last week I learned that you can do a loan and it takes you off the cap and it doesn't need a buyout, but only if there's competing offers from other clubs overseas. Really weird rule. It's not written down on the public website, but apparently that's why Koutsias did not need a buyout and he's able to go on this 1-year loan. And there is a permanent option. I don't know exactly how the specifics of that will work, if they want to take that permanent move or if he were to go somewhere else, but we'll see what happens there. I think he'll do very, very well in Lugano. He'll do very, very well in Switzerland. And yeah, Koutsias actually came to the higher ups a couple of months ago and said, I would like to play back in Europe and be closer to my friends and family. And him going to Lugano satisfies that. He's now just a quick train ride to Zurich Airport and quick flight away from Greece. So,
yeah, it's a good move for the Fire as well. Koutsias definitely showed flashes of a player that had promise, but I don't think really emerged as a kind of reliable second best option at that position at the MLS level. So I think this is kind of a win.
He reminded me a lot of honestly Brant Bronico back in like 2017 and the beginning of 2018 when you could tell he works. He is a hustler. He is going to go after every ball, but he's not getting it in the back of the net.
So
Granted,
obviously,
Bronico was more defensive mid, but still, like Kuzias, he just could not get it done, unfortunately.
obviously, if you're the Fire, you wish him well. You also kind of hope he kills it in Lugano, to the point that he gets interest at another club somewhere in Europe or elsewhere. Because obviously, if he is sold to that team, the Fire would get Gam from the transfer and would not have to use his buyout, making a move to Lugano permanent. So that could be a win-win. He does, if assuming he doesn't come back and play more games with the Fire, he is one shy of Frank Lopez's goal total, both in MLS and all competitions, for most by a Greek-born Chicago Fire player in history.
Which is a fun stat.
A fun stat.
But because Frank Lopez played for the U.S., he can always rest easy knowing he's the top Greek international.
You don't think that the Greek, what is it, like U19s count as more than the USMNT, Alex?
No, played for the country of Greece as opposed to the U.S.
Oh, US, and I get what you're saying. Okay, got it now.
And he's gonna be on the Greek national team one day. I can say that with some confidence. I do believe in him as a player. I just think it's a very difficult situation in Chicago where you're going to be the number 2 no matter what, as long as Hugo Kuipers is there. And there's pretty much not really anything he can do to change that. So it's just best for him to be in a team where he's going to be the go-to striker. That's a fact. And he's going to be one of the top goal scorers in the Swiss league, if I have to guess, because I do believe in him. And I think the Swiss league is a lower level than MLS. So this is going to be really good for him.
Yep, agreed on that. So that is the subtraction. Several additions. First of all, familiar faces to Fire fans. David Pareba and Omari Glasgow have both signed first-team deals. Pareba has signed for this season, 2025, with an option through 2028. Those are all team options because MLS. Glasgow signed through 2026 with team options for 27 and 28. Pareba, obviously team captain last season, the MLS Golden Boot winner, MLS Next Pro Golden Boot winner, MLS Next Pro Best 11. Glasgow, Guyana's all-time leading scorer at a very young age.
He's 21, by the way. I never have to look up his age because he was born exactly one day after me.
That's hilarious. Pareba made several Fire first-team game day sheets last year. Didn't get a chance to make an appearance. Glasgow did make his 2 allowed MLS appearances last season. Both of them promising talents. Both of them players that the Fire were liable to lose if they did not sign to first-team deals.
Yeah, so I'll give you my opinion on these 2. I think Pareba is the much more significant of these 2, just because he completely mastered and dominated the MLS Next Pro level. He was the best player who consistently, regularly played in that league last season. He won the Golden Boot and the MVP, as we know, and he was too good for that level. So taking the step up to the MLS level, similarly to how Jason Russell-Rowe did in 2022 when he accomplished the same thing with Columbus, I think that's the right step. Omari, I mean, everybody loves Omari. He's maybe arguably the most popular player universally among Fire fans. I think that's not even that much of a stretch.
A Fire 2.
Of people who follow Fire 2, yeah.
Yeah. Because you said Fire player, and I'm like, Guti would like a word, please.
Yeah, okay.
Jonathan Dean.
He's right up there. Point is, with Omari, I wouldn't say he mastered the MLS Next Pro level in the way that Pareba did. And I don't know that he'll necessarily translate right away to the MLS level either because of his size. So we'll see how this goes for him. I am rooting for Omari just as much, if not more, than everyone else. But I think Pareba for me is more of a sure thing that he's gonna at least be able to be something of a contributor. Omari, he's like you said, he's really, really small. And what he's been able to do for Guyana is impressive, considering he's it's a small country, but it's still a country that's been playing international soccer for almost a century. He's their all-time leading scorer, but a lot of those goals came against, Saint-Martin, Bonaire, Montserrat. Just keep
Guyana's been. They were stuck in the lower tiers of CONCACAF Nations League that, they have now progressed out of that, but that meant that they had to play some opposition that even compared to Guyana, which has a population of, significantly under 1 million people.
Guyana, let's just say, is geographically and population-wise larger than probably 80% of the countries that Omari scored his international goals against.
Pretty much.
And again, we're not talking about a massive. We're talking about a country with less.
We're talking about a very, very small country that used to be run by an old lady from Chicago.
And all right, so we're getting into the history of Guyanese politics, including.
Tim knew that.
Yes, her husband was a dentist that ran the country before that, which is how that happened. But it's a country that is like less than half the population of Trinidad and Tobago. If that helps set people's, if that's a decent reference point. Now, really quickly, what should Fire fans expect from these two players in MLS in 2025 in terms of minutes, production, that kind of stuff?
I'd say for Pareba, about 700 minutes, 2 goals, maybe like 3 starts. I don't think you're going to get a lot out of either of these guys. I mean, it could be more if he completely explodes. And I don't know what position Pareba's even going to play for the first team, because he played striker for the second team, but naturally he's a number 10. But my guess would be 2 to 4 goals this season and under 1,000 minutes. Omari, I think, might appear in more games as a substitute, but with less minutes. So for Omari, I'm estimating around 600 minutes, 0 goals, maybe like 2 assists. But if Omari scores an MLS goal, that would be the moment, and it's already set in stone.
My question right now is with Omari and Pareba is, I imagine Pareba probably ends up backing up Guti. And of course, the question is, what's going on with Guti with the national team? Does he actually get called up this year? And the question with Glasgow is,
I wouldn't bank on that.
I wouldn't, but
Guti is pretty far out of the conversation at the moment.
The closest he can obviously work his way. Conversation was in 2023, and he completely fell out of it since then.
Now, I mean, obviously he could work his way back into that conversation, but that is something that would have to trail his performance, which we haven't seen. I frankly could see both Omari and Pareba maybe spending a little bit of time on the wing, assuming the Fire are relatively weak there, because Pareba's natural position, sort of like as an attacking midfielder, is just a more complicated position to get early on, and the level gap between Next Pro and MLS is pretty big, and you don't want to basically throw someone into the deep end early on. So a position that is just simpler to play, where they could, both of those players could still use one of their primary skills, which is that ability to sort of like find the space needed to get a goal, I think is not out of the question.
Yeah, and I think with Pareba too, it's going to be difficult to get minutes up front, just because you have Kuipers, obviously, who's going to play 80 minutes a game on average, 85 minutes a game. You have Tom Barlow, he's a third choice striker, but right now he's the second choice striker. And then you also have Dean Boltz, who we'll talk about in a bit. But that's 3 other strikers there. And if they bring in a proper, true tested backup number 9, then there'll be 4 other guys. So
Giassi's artist. Legit, I said that before as a joke, but it would not shock me considering Berhalter and Zardes know each other.
If he takes a pay cut, if he takes a serious pay cut to be the number 2 striker, that would be a good move. But it would have to be a pay cut.
And we'll talk about the Fire's cap position and stuff in a little bit. Other moves: Jack Elliott signed as a free agent. He spent his entire career with Philadelphia. He came to the Union through the MLS Super Draft. Was a West Virginia Mountaineer before that, despite being from London, England.
And Scottish
Here we go.
parents.
Yeah.
And look, for those who say the Super Draft doesn't matter, 77th overall pick just a few years ago in 2017. So.
And he was one of the top free agents, I think, on the board this year in MLS.
You could argue he was the top one, just because of his pedigree as one of the top center backs in MLS.
Well, and the thing with free agents is you never really know, just because a player is listed as being a free agent, like, are they really available?
Aaron Long was listed as a free agent, but then he just re-signed with LAFC, so that doesn't really count.
Exactly. And I think that's always the question with free agents, because we're new into this sort of like free agency process for a lot of players to the point where it's like anything close to what it actually is, which is like a genuine free agency for a significant class of players. And I think we're still kind of like learning about how that works from the perspective of different players and their agents and stuff like that. I think a lot of people last year assumed Kellen Acosta was going to just get re-signed by LAFC. Then it turns out, no, he was actually available as a bona fide free agent. Same thing with Jack Elliott. And I think out of those, you're right, Alex. Like, he's probably, I mean, he's number 1 or number 2, right? But like, that was on the board. But like, with Aaron Long gone, like a top one, and especially at his position, he really has become, I think, one of the best center backs in this league. He scored a brace in the 2022 MLS Cup final, which, Alex, you pointed out means that between him and Kellen Acosta, the Fire have 50% of the goal production from that game now on the roster.
So Gazdag is joining next, is what I'm saying.
Put it in your calendar. But he's, again, like a top center back in the league. The Union got to where they got with a relatively low roster spend because of the fact that they were able to be defensively stout. And, part of it is Andre Blake being as good as he has been in goal, but part of it was just like a solid defense in front of him. And Jack Elliott really was anchoring that for a very long time. He also, on occasion, in sort of like, this is MLS, you don't have deep rosters situations, has played as kind of a number 6 defensive midfielder because unlike a number of center backs in this league, including some very good ones, he can actually progress the ball forward with his feet, which is something that we've seen that like Greg Berhalter's system seems like it wants. A guy that can, take the ball from the back, get it forward, and start building out that way. And so that, again, is why it's like not just like a good signing in terms of him being a top center back in the league, but I think a good signing for the Fire.
And something I'm also going to say, I know we're going to talk about the Super Draft in a bit, but just since you brought it up, the second round pick, which I know we'll come back to him, but Travis Smith, he's coming from a system at Wake Forest where they are very, very committed to playing out of the back as well. That they, even in college soccer where that's like an alien thing, they are committed to that. So Greg Berhalter has shown already with his first 2 center back signings, or additions, I guess, in some form, that that's what this team is going to look like. And I think that when we think about the center back position and how the fullbacks are going to be approached going forward, that's going to have to be how you think about it. And he didn't necessarily have that luxury with the national team for a lot of the time, given the player pool there at center back. So I think that's what you're going to see with Berhalter. It's going to be a commitment to defenders that can pass and can play out of the back in that way.
Yes. Last thing about Elliott, I think, before I move on, unless you got something, DJ.
No, I will say it's very good to see him signed because now we have at least a little more MLS experience on the roster. That's something that I've pointed out the last few years. The Fire have not had much of it at all. So having, Acosta, having Elliott to a degree, Mueller, that's and Gutman to a degree. They're at least going to help with the leadership.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we sort of saw from the previous front office where they didn't really rate MLS players that highly, which is sort of funny because you're obviously just the point of a league is you're competing against other players in the league. So if you're good in the league, you'd think that that would count for something. But that did start to change last year, like signing Acosta, signing Gutman. And it's good to see that we're getting more of that. Jack Elliott, when the Fire played Philadelphia in Chicago last July, um, the Fire won that game, as you pointed out, Alex, one of 7 wins that season. Elliott was one of the last guys just sitting and kind of almost sulking on the bench around the Union. Um, he clearly took it personally. Like that's the level of passion that this guy had for his team. I'd expect that he will feel the same way about the Fire in pretty short order. Like one of Berhalter's skills that we've seen is his ability to like bring players into the fold effectively, both in his time with the national team and his time in MLS before that. Uh, so it's good to have someone that's that passionate.
I mean, look, if you want an example of that, Yunus Musa probably wasn't considering the U.S. when he was first approached by Greg Berhalter and Nico Estevez. I think you could confidently say today that he is going to fight tooth and nail for that team, and because of Greg Berhalter, the way he brought him into the fold and the culture he built there. So I think even new guys coming in, new recruits, I wouldn't say they're mercenaries, that they're just coming here to play like some players you might call that in the previous couple of years. I don't think that's going to be the case here.
So going right ahead to other additions then. Dylan Borso signed to a homegrown contract. Alex, I know that you're very passionate about this.
Yes.
So signed through 2027, options 2028 and 2029. Can you say what the expectation should be for Dylan Borso, both this season and, looking forward through his career? Because obviously the Fire have him locked up potentially for a number of seasons at this point.
Yeah, so the last player the Fire signed as a homegrown out of college was Victor Becerra. I don't think that's a fair comparison. I think we're talking more of a Mauricio Pineda type contributor, not in his first year because Pineda was 22, but Dylan Borso is the Fire's top 06. I was a little bit surprised they didn't sign him in the summer. And this is a guy who I think is going to be with the Fire for many years to come if he can stay largely healthy and continue his development at the rate he's doing it right now. For those who haven't seen him play, he's a center mid or winger. He's got the air for the spectacular. Just look up his goals he scored at Wake Forest. They're incredible. Loves to take on defenders, can combine very, very well. I think this season you're going to see him here and there a little bit in the second half of the year. You're going to see a lot of him with Fire too. But it's absolutely huge for the Fire to get this locked up. This is someone who loves the club so much. This was his goal when he went to Wake Forest, was to prove that he was ready to sign a homegrown contract with the Fire. And this is an immense talent for the MLS level, I think. I'd like to see him involved with the youth national teams a bit more in the coming months, but this is really, really big for the Fire to get this done. And I think even if he wasn't signed in the summer, it works out really well for them to get him now when they do have the ability to sign him onto the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of 5 homegrowns on the Fire roster. Using the homegrown status. One of, and including the player we're about to talk about, 12 players on the Fire roster that are from the Chicagoland area.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about him and just about homegrowns in general, someone brought this up on social media, so I just kind of wanted to respond to the question. I don't remember who asked it, but they said, why was he signed now and not in the summer? And I think it's something to keep an eye on with homegrown signings going forward. Is in 2020, the Fire signed 5 homegrowns, right? And 3 of them flopped pretty hard. And they were signed as 15, 16-year-olds, and it didn't work out. So I think what you're going to see a bit more of going forward, obviously there are going to be exceptions to that. There are some immense talents in the academy, but I think what you're going to see some of is players who either will go to college for at least a year to quote unquote prove they're ready, take a step up, or what I think you're going to see a bit more of very, very soon is players being signed to Fire 2 contracts that have the option to be converted into a first team contract. And in
Which is
this
obviously
case,
not an option in 2020.
right. In this case, you're seeing Borso, who had just turned 18 in June and had that essentially one semester at Wake Forest, where he was one of their best players in the second half of the season. No, their best player in the second half of the season. But I think some of these academy players, 08s, who were playing Fire 2 last year, who were really making the headlines for Fire 2, they're all getting, well, some of them are getting offers to sign Fire 2 deals, MLS Next Pro deals. And I think what you're going to see is some of those in the coming weeks and months signing second team deals that can be converted into a homegrown contract if they meet certain goals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, other thing just to, obviously make clear is that it by the summer, I think the writing was on the wall for pretty much everyone with this front office, and that's why we didn't see really any moves other than
Well, they didn't have any roster space. That was
right, other than Ariel Loster coming in, which is obviously a more of a rental than purchased situation in the long run. Although, speaking of additional signings, um, the Fire had 3 picks in the MLS Super Draft, including the 3rd overall pick. They're they used that pick to draft Dean Bolts. Uh, Dean Bolts is a Generation Adidas signing, so that's for players that are not done with college but are earlier on. But MLS basically recognizes some standout talents in the college game and pre-signs them to contracts so that if a team drafts them, they are automatically added to the supplemental roster for that team. Uh, Alex, you interviewed Bolts. You did a profile on him. Uh, just give us a little bit about what to expect from him.
Yeah, so Bolts is 18 years old. He's an 06 like Borso, which means the Fire signed 2 06s starting with BO within a couple hours of each other. He's from Soccer's FC. He never played for the Fire's academy, but he and his family are all huge Fire fans. He told me he's been to over 100 Fire games in his life. His parents are season ticket holders. So this is great. He's really excited to play for the Fire. He told me he was hoping the Fire would draft him. I'd recommend checking out that story. But in terms of a player, he's a very high work rate center forward. He can also play out on the wing. His one-on-one dribbling is not the best from the clips I saw, but he's a good finisher. He's really good in the press. That's what I've noticed from what I saw from Wisconsin. I've only seen a little bit because he was drafted yesterday, but being the number 3 overall pick, this is a good pick, I think. You could have seen this coming from a mile away when he was announced as a Generation Adidas player. But yeah, I think this is a solid addition. I'm curious how many minutes he'll get because there are 3 other nominal number 9s, and the rumors were they were going to sign another. I don't know if that'll happen now, but yeah, I think it's a good pick. And the Fire, this is the highest draft pick the Fire have had in a very long time. So I think since 2016, I want to say.
Yeah, they did have Mo Adams 2018. So
there you go.
But still, that's like 6 years since the Fire have had a semi-consistent contributor, and that included Elliott Collier, which I mean.
And with Bolts automatically signed and added to the MLS supplemental roster for the Fire now because they picked him up, that does fill the supplemental roster. We'll talk about what that means and stuff like that in a couple minutes. 2 other draft picks for the Fire. Quickly, Travis Smith Jr. from Wake Forest. So another Wake Forest connection for the Fire. And Kenny Kenyane from the University of Dayton. Alex, you had pieces covering both of these. Do you want to give us a quick rundown on these 2 guys?
Yeah, so Travis Smith So I actually saw both of these guys play in the last year. I wasn't specifically watching either of them, admittedly, because I was watching other players or teams in those games, but I've seen both of these guys play in this year. Travis Smith Jr. is a defender. He can play different positions on the back line for Wake Forest. Wake Forest had a bad start to the season and then finished the year really, really well when Dylan Borso went into the starting lineup, and he ended up going crazy at the end of the season. Travis Smith, he's not a goal-scoring player. He scored 1 goal last season. It was against Syracuse. It was the goal that ended Syracuse's season in the ACC tournament. It was assisted by Dylan Borso. So there's a connection there. These guys have played with each other. I think he's well
By the way,
regarded within the Wake
Alex
Forest.
isn't going to say this because it hurts him too much. If you want to see what that looks like, you can check out the Chicago Fire's team socials because they posted it.
Yeah, well, you can do that if you want, but I'm not going to. So yeah, look, this is a guy who's well regarded within Wake Forest. He's got good reviews within the ACC. He's one of the better center backs in that league. So I think this is a very good MLS Next Pro edition. I think for Fire 2, this is a good Fire 2 signing. The defensive positions are going to be really, really stacked for Fire 2, and we're going to come back to another one in just a moment. But yeah, in terms of the other guy, his name is evading me right now. Kanyane.
Yeah, Gani Kanyane.
I think I saw him play for Des Moines Menace over the summer against Chicago City. But to be honest, I don't remember anything specifically about him because I was there to watch Felipe D'Agostini and Noah Singleman from Syracuse. So, yeah, I'll have to watch more of him if he gets signed. But with a 3rd round pick, there's really no guarantee he's going to get signed. I'm sure he'll get an invite to preseason, but we'll take a look at him if that happens. But he only played in his graduate year. He didn't play a lot in his senior year or junior year for Dayton. So it's an interesting pick in the 3rd round. There are definitely other guys I had earmarked as possible picks that I think would have been a more surefire things for Fire 2 than this guy. So let's see what Eddie Rock, Greg Berhalter, maybe they were doing some scouting and maybe they've identified this guy as someone that has some talent that they can benefit the second team, probably. But we'll see.
Kanyane also has played for the he has been in the South African national team picture with the U20s. He played at the COSAFA U20 World Cup in 2019, but he didn't play in the U20 World Cup or U20 African Cup earlier in the year.
The COSAFA, I think that's for there's restrictions on which players you can call up for that.
Yep. But he was still, at least South African national team is aware of him, which is better than nothing.
True.
Other piece about that obviously is that for him to fit on a Next Pro or MLS roster, there is international slot that's going to get used, which is relevant for both. But Alex, as you pointed out, Mike Makovich, now the Fire 2 head coach, certainly has a lot of tools at his disposal potentially. Obviously, other than Bolts, super draft picks need to get signed to deals before they play for an MLS team. Or an MLS Next Pro team for that matter. So, we will see how that evolves over the coming weeks. So with that, I think that we've kind of set up a situation where we can talk about the Fire roster. We did have something that was unexpected, I think, at least to most of us, that came out this past week when MLS just suddenly published the amount of GAM available for each and every team in the league. I had a piece about this that went up. I think a lot of it's been kind of miscontextualized a little bit. But the Fire are 26th in the league in terms of the amount of available GAM that they've got. Now, this GAM is before teams have committed it to any players and stuff. So a lot of players that are already signed to a lot of the rosters around the league will need to use some form of allocation money or one of the other mechanisms to fit onto the rosters under the salary cap. That hasn't, been accounted for with this number. And we don't know how often we're going to get updates on these numbers because this is the first time it's happened. The first time that we knew officially from MLS about like who was in what roster slot and what the rosters were like from different teams was last May. They updated it last May. They updated it in September. I don't know if this is going to happen more often. I hope it does. Um, but we still don't have the complete picture about where teams are with the salary cap because we don't know what the cap hit is for individual players. We don't know what transfer fees are like for individual players officially. We have estimates from Transfer Market and other places. We don't know about signing bonuses. We don't know about new deals until the Players Association publishes it. And even then, the number's not the same. We don't know how much TAM each team has. So there's a lot of play in these numbers. Um, but some rough math that you can see if you read the story on Man in Red 97 um, is that the Fire have potentially 2.2 million of cap space to play with right now. Now that could be off by as much as like $2.2 million, right? Like that Fire could have basically none if um some of the numbers and assumptions going into that are not correct. So we know more. We still don't know really enough to be able to say concrete things about where rosters are and stuff like that. Um, but with that, we've also published Alex and I on MinRed97.com a Fire roster tracker. There have been several updates that you can check out on social media. We may update the story later with some of those new signings. Um, between Elliott, Glasgow, Borso, Pareba, and Bolts, the Fire have made 5 signings this offseason. Only one of those, Jack Elliott, is on the senior roster. The others are all supplemental roster players. Currently, the supplemental roster is completely full. 30 players are available on the roster. The Fire have 25 altogether, 5 senior spots open. Supplemental roster has 10 of those slots. All 10 are filled. The Fire can free those up if they loan a player outside of the sort of like Fire organization. And if the team that is receiving the player agrees to basically cover their salary. Um, that is something that didn't happen with any of the Flyers loanees last year, and I think that sort of hamstrung their ability to get some of the signings done that they wanted. Um, so I guess there we are. Alex, what's sort of your read on the Flyers roster building and position right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to really know without knowing who's going to leave because I don't think we have a good grasp yet on we're still very early in the offseason, if that makes sense. They're in a position where if they get the guys off the books that they need to get off the books, then I think they're going to be in a very good position. But for now, it's difficult to say. Obviously, they're low on GAM in terms of relative to the rest of the league, but there are ways they can get that back up soon. Like, for example, they have 500,000 more than the report said because of Miguel Navarro. If John Duran goes somewhere in January, they can get an extra million or something or more.
Oh, it would almost certainly be enough to get
What's the cap on GAM you can get?
3 million
I
per
think
season.
3 million. So there you go.
No,
That's
3 million. So the Fire have already gotten 500,000 of that from the Miguel Angel Navarro when he was moved.
So like if
permanently
Duran goes for even just 40 mil, the Fire will still hit the ceiling that they can get from GAM. So the point is, there are going to be ways that they're going to get more GAM soon. And if they sell players and if they do this, if they do that.
Right. If they sell players, the other thing obviously is
trades within the league. They have extra international slots. That's worth noting. If the
which
Fire
typically are more valuable the closer you get to the roster compliance date.
right.
Or
So
when a team needs to add
Fire
someone
have
after.
4 open international slots because they're only using 4 right now. They're going to sign at least 5 more players in this offseason. If they sign even just a couple of those as domestic players, so either American or green card holders, then they'll have international slots to burn, which if you trade those away in February can be over $100,000 of allocation money. So,
yeah. And that's, of course, assuming that the Fire are not working the ability they've shown to get players green cards quickly. Arnaud Souquet, I think, is the current Fire record holder with that, having won in his second season. The players that would sort of be eligible for that right now look like it would probably be Toby Salquist and Hugo Kuipers.
And Marin.
So Marin, Swiss players are not likely to get green
Swiss
cards for
players
tax
can
reasons.
get them in
Oh,
theory,
really?
but for tax reasons, there's absolutely zero incentive for them to do it.
So yeah, that's not likely to happen. Obviously, unless
Intriguing.
someone's going for full U.S. citizenship as a part of the process. I don't think that we've. I mean, maybe if Greg Berhalter calls his contacts at U.S. Soccer and tries telling Marin that he would get a USMNT call up if he just got a U.S. passport, that may do the deal. But I don't think any of those
Marin,
things are
buy
really
this
that
pickup
likely to
truck and
happen.
you can play for the national team. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that didn't work out for Rafa Chihos, who did buy a pickup truck. But so yeah, it's not the best position the Fire are in right now. I mean, it's the position that Greg Berhalter and the rest of the front office sort of inherited. They were right up against the cap and had a full roster last year, so they've been moving on from players. Obviously, an ability to move several players on helps both with cap potentially increasing the GAM if they don't get it from like John Duran getting sold or something like that in January, which maybe they do, maybe they don't, because right now Duran looks like he may actually be Unai Emery's preferred striker option at Villa. So that may mean he's sticking around. They did just sign him to a new deal for a number of years. I had assumed that was because they wanted to sell him and wanted to retain his rights, but you never know. But as it stands, it looks like the Fire potentially have an ability to add one or two more significant pieces, barring any departures and or getting more GAM or allocation money one way or another. Um, they've been shopping for an attacking piece, basically, someone that would be able to play, wing or attacking midfielder, potentially both. Uh, you know, I mean, play in both spots. I don't think both positions right now. I think there's a question about how quickly the Fire are able to find the targets they want and bring them in. Um, a lot of the higher spending teams in the league, and the Fire would definitely count in that bracket, try to do more of their business in the summer because that is when the global transfer market is most active. That is when most players are available. And that's when other teams have the ability to replace a player they're selling to you a lot easier because just the market is that much bigger. It's unclear if the front office's plan right now is to try to maybe add a piece, but not the big piece they're looking for and hold off to the summer and hope that the results are there to get the team into the playoffs and then look better in the second half of the season, or if they're going to try to get a lot of work done this offseason because the roster does need, as much help as it can get, obviously coming from the second worst record in MLS last season with ambitions to obviously finish a lot higher than that.
I said this before, and I've been thinking this for a while. This offseason feels a lot like the 2016 offseason, where there were so many things that had to be moved around that you can't do it all in one offseason, especially considering looking just at the senior roster. I think there's like 6 guys that are either out of contract or on options for next year. And it would not shock me if that's what Berhalter ends up doing, where they just kind of duct tape everything together, what they can, to get through the summer. Summer, they start making the signings, similar to Delu and Solignac. And then next season, you actually start seeing like the big guys. You start seeing Dax McCarty. You start seeing Boschy come back in. Because right now, even if you let go of guys like Jimenez or Suke, there's a question of how can you really replace them? And even with replacing them, it's like, is it really worth buying out Suke right now when Suke's gone next year anyway? Same with Jimenez. If nobody's coming to offer, is it really worth buying him out considering, again, he's gone after the season? He's not coming back. I don't think Berhalter sees him that well, so you know what I mean?
Yeah, and
it's
the
also
rule
the
of thumb
roster
is
of, like with Jimenez, is keeping him as a DP versus anything like that.
versus you could be a TAM player, but then the team would need to use that allocation money, so they'd have to have it free. I think that you're right. Like I think the question becomes what the long term plan is, because I think that one thing that we've seen so far from Joe Mansueto and his ownership of the Fire is that he's willing to follow a plan. Um, yeah, I mean, I think longer than most people believe in it in the case of Georg Heitz, but uh, it's not like Berhalter feels like he's under pressure to, get to a certain spot this year or else. I think that it's more of a long term plan, which I think is the right thing in the long run. The general rule of thumb that we've heard from a number of execs around the league and stuff like that, including Garth Lagerwey, who's the one guy that really talks about this more than pretty much everyone else combined, is you basically need 3 windows to overhaul a roster in MLS. So obviously, winter, summer this year would count as 2 of them, and then winter next year would count as the third. Um, I think it's possible to get better quicker, like we saw FC Cincinnati do that, but they also really lucked out by getting some good players that were more or less discarded by other MLS teams, and so you're requiring other teams in the league to make basically big mistakes to be able to pick those up.
There's also, with that said, there's also the fact that how many players on the roster right now are going to be here at the beginning of next year. Not just the guys that are on contract, but like guys that are under contract too. Looking at,
Yeah. No, there's certainly some sale possibilities that are available. And like I think Alex, you hit on those a little bit. I think Gaston Jimenez is linked on an annual basis with a move back to Argentina. I think that'll happen at some point. I think the question is what point.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we'll find out more on that in the coming weeks if that's going to happen this year.
a lot of the other players the Fire I think would like to move on from. The difficulty is just the question is like who, because right now, MLS players have guaranteed contracts. So they would need to get an offer that is compelling to move. Um, so Brian Gutierrez has a high ceiling. He hasn't really, I think, come close to reaching it yet with the Fire. Um, in theory, he would have transfer value, particularly to a number of clubs in Mexico that could afford to pay him reasonably. But he's making a lot of money with the Fire, and it's sort of hard to see him getting that much of a additional payday, if any at all, if he moved elsewhere. So, why would he say yes to taking less money home? Um, and then there's guys that are just on contracts that I think are fairly rich for what they've given the Fire so far. Arnaud Souquet would be, one of those players. I think that, there's a number of others that are sort of like at different places on the roster that just like whatever you think of the player, the cap hit isn't worth it. Um, and those can take time to move on from.
also the question of guys like Tehran moving to Europe, assuming he can actually stay healthy this year.
Yeah, and that's the issue, right? Tehran certainly has the profile. He's had interest from Europe before. He was linked with moves, got hurt at the wrong time, but like sooner or later, if you keep on getting hurt at the wrong time, uh, teams start thinking, well, there isn't a right time, and you don't want to sign a guy that doesn't actually have an ability to stick in your lineup long time because they can't stay healthy. Um, so I guess setting expectations for the offseason, Berhalter said initially they wanted to sign 5 or 6 players. Now, depending on how you count, we could be at 5 between Elliott, then, Glauco and Pareba from MLS Next Pro, and then Bolts and Orso coming from college. I don't know if that's what he meant or if he meant, 5 or 6 players on the senior roster. I think we'll find out. Obviously, 5 or 6 players on the senior roster would require a lot of moves out as well.
And there's still questions too about positioning, which have to be really need to be answered because we don't know who the starting right back is right now.
Correct.
Or
There is no
who's
starting right back.
yeah. Like don't get me wrong, I like Dean, I like Reynolds, and I don't think Souquet is going to step on the field for the Fire next year, unless that's center back. So we kind of need that answered quickly.
And look,
Well,
you'll have more. You'll have more on the potential outgoing transfers from me in the coming days. Keep an eye out for that.
yeah. A number of
Yeah.
moves that are possible, some more likely than others out. Um, One more move in though, Alex. You were the one that's kind of been on this story from day one.
Mhm.
Someone local to you signed to the Fire too.
Yes. So Olu Oyegunle. I remember we had a segment on him when we did the Super Draft show almost 12 months ago to the day when he was picked in the second round, 33rd overall by the Fire. The Fire actually technically traded up with 50,000 GAM to draft him. So Oyegunle was one of the top center backs in college soccer in 2021, 2022, and 2023 seasons with Syracuse Orange, and he won the national championship in 2022 as the star center back of that team. And like I said at the time, in college, he was arguably a top 10 draft pick in MLS in terms of his talent, in terms of his ability. And I've had scouts and agents in the last couple of days raving to me about how they're shocked that it took him this long to be on a roster because of how talented and how good he is. So the Fire now, 12 months after drafting him, have signed him to a next pro contract. The reason it took this long is because in 2024 preseason, he declined an invite to preseason because he wanted a guarantee of a contract before arriving at preseason, and the Fire don't really do that. So, yeah, that's why he wasn't signed last season, but he did not find a club in Europe, which was his ambition. And now he's back in Chicago. Now, here's where it's interesting. He hasn't played a soccer game since Syracuse was eliminated from the NCAA tournament by the University of New Hampshire over a year ago. So he hasn't played a game in 13 months. We'll see how that goes for him. But in terms of talent, he's still only 22 years old. He's better talent wise than any of the other senior defenders on the Fire 2 roster. So this will be a good addition for Fire 2 if he's fit, if he's locked in, if he's eager and ready to go. Motivation, because he hasn't played a game in 13 months, is probably the only red flag because he didn't want to sign at MLS originally, and here he is now, 13 months, 12 months later, I guess. But yeah, this is a good signing. And if you want a bit more on him and his background with Syracuse, you can check out the story on menred97.com.
Yeah. And again, like this is one of the nice assets of having a reserve team in a reserve league is that you're able to bring players into the fold and there's not really risk because you're not using one of a few, supplemental roster spots on the guy. But he stays in your control. And if it works out, you can sign them to the first team or even, sign them to a contract that converts to a first team contract.
And I very much
conditions.
think this is someone who can do that. Like most
Right.
of the Fire 2 specific signings in the last couple of years, you look at Andreas Euland, who was the ACC Defender of the Year 2022. He got signed in 2023 by the Fire. You've got Diego Connings, who was good, but not great. Jalen Shannon, he was all right, not great. I think Olu is a lot better than these guys. And I think it's a different story with him than the other guys. This is someone who, surely, when you're signing him, there's a reason they traded 50,000 GAM to get him. He can be an MLS player, even if they weren't ready to sign him on day one of preseason last year. That doesn't mean he can't be an MLS player in the future. And I think in terms of talent, he's better than any of the other center backs that Fire 2 have signed as these older guys out of college. I think in terms of play style, one-on-one defending, he's one of the best I've seen in college soccer. And he's big and he's strong and he's quick. He has everything you want. I think at the MLS Next Pro level, he's going to be one of the best center backs in the league, and he has upside that projects into a future MLS player. Now, I'm saying all of this from what I saw from him at Syracuse. He hasn't played a game in 13 months, so there might be some rust in preseason at the beginning of the year. But in terms of talent, what he can be, what I know he can be, this is a great addition.
And this is what, again, one of the benefits of having that reserve squad, because you can take a risk on players like that. Greg Berhalter, I asked him basically what he thought of the role of MLS Next Pro, because that's something that didn't exist the last time he was in the league. Um, and basically he said that there's two things. Like, it exists to help get players into the first team, and potentially to be a revenue source for the team by selling players on from the next reserve team. So it's not about winning in the next pro squad itself. Like, that's a nice side benefit, I'm sure, and it gives players a unique experience. But it really is about trying to see who can contribute to the overall structure of the team, either by eventually working their way up to the first team and getting minutes that way, or by being sold on and being a revenue source for the club. Um, and this seems like it's the same thing as we saw last year, where the team has taken some high risk, potentially high payoff signings with draft picks, which seems to make sense in an era when you're not going to reliably get MLS players from every person you draft, but there are some players that can be, significant contributors either in MLS or elsewhere, that are available through it.
Mhm.
So we have run very long, but we wanted to get through everything. Uh,
For reference, were last recorded about 2 weeks ago, and what a 2 weeks it has been, considering in the month and a half prior there was no news.
and hopefully the news keeps on coming out. Hopefully for all of us, I think at a little bit of a slower pace. But we will plan on seeing you guys in the new year. We're still planning on releasing around every 2 weeks, although that will vary based on what happens around us. But we would like to thank all of you for listening. This is technically going to be the last episode of our second season. And so we look forward to hearing you in season 3. We look forward to talking about hopefully a lot of new signings. And we wish everyone here happy holidays for all the holidays that you're celebrating or about to celebrate. And a happy new year until we talk to you again.
Indeed.
Yes, everybody, thanks for following along with Men in Red this year. So, happy New Year, full of Weihnachten, everything. Happy Hanukkah, all of the above. And stay locked in, because we'll have more coming every single week at menandred.com.
Come on, you Men in Red.